there is a big difference between happiness and purpose.
Yes.
Do you find happiness through purpose? Not necessarily. I'm not an overly happy guy, but I've got purpose, and that gets me through. It gets me through the tough stuff, and it keeps me from suicide, honestly, because I know that I've got work to do. If you have purpose, you know you have work to do. So when the intrusive suicidal thoughts pop in, you're like, yeah, fuck you. Fuck you, suicidal thought. I've got I've got people to help. I've got work to do. So you just fuck off. I'm not ready to leave the planet quite yet. This show is sponsored by shopveteran.ca and the Canadian Legacy Project. Are you a veteran who owns a business? If so, register your business for free on shopveteran.ca, or if you would like to support veteran-owned businesses, be sure to make shopveteran.ca your first stop shop. Thanks, everybody. Hello, all you beautiful souls. Thank you for joining me for another edition of Operation Tango Romeo, the Trauma Recovery Podcast. As previously stated in several of my shows, there are a few different segments of the veteran community that are wildly underrepresented. And it mostly has to do with women. Women veterans are underrepresented with everything from health issues, physical health, mental health, and just being treated as equals as veterans. How many times have women with their veterans plates been asked, "Oh, is that your husband's plate?" It just happens all the time, and they don't get the same respect and status as their male counterparts. So talking about that and much, much more, I am so pleased to have Heather Vanderveer on the show today. Hello, Heather.
Hi, Mark. It's so great to be here. I know you've been bugging me for a while to come on, so here I am.
Here you are. Well, I've covered women's issues related to the show a fair bit, but not nearly enough. So from your perspective, what are the biggest gaps in service from Veterans Affairs?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, and again, there's so many gaps like we're having. The fact that women are underrated, the fact that the programs aren't tailored, to what we need. Because again, everything seems to be like combat male centric is what it does. And again, that's no disrespect to any of my combat male brothers, but it's just, we maybe don't necessarily, we may need something, for example, like a yoga class, and we need VAC to start funding that. We don't need maybe to be in group settings. Maybe we prefer more one-on-one. I mean, I think like what VAC needs to do, they needs to start looking at things like on a case-by-case basis. And I have brought this up with them before by saying, again, a woman maybe not necessarily want to take a group yoga class with a bunch of men, and again, that's no disrespect to men, but that's just kind of the space, that she's at. If hopefully that makes sense what I'm trying to say. So.
No, it does. Now, recently you testified, was it the Senate or the parliamentary study? You did both, didn't you?
I did. I've done both. Yes, I have. So November of last year, I testified before the committee for the first time on C11. And then I got called back in April to testify before committee on being a veteran business owner, which I explained some of the problems as being a female veteran business owner. And then I just got asked to go speak at the Senate in June on C11.
And what was the talk more about that? Explain that a little bit
C11?
more. Yeah.
With C11, for anyone that's not aware of it, is they've taken the ability to charge sexual assaults, misconduct. They've taken that out of the military. So it is now all going to civilian courts as of, I think it was the 15th of June of this year. So just to put it like in a nutshell, and there's a lot more complexities to this. So for example, if somebody, and again, when I speak of military sexual trauma, it happens to both men and women, both men and women can be perpetrators. So this is not just a female issue. I always want to state that. So for example, if a young private's serving at a mess dinner and they get inappropriately touched, they cannot go through the chain of command anymore. They will have to go off the base and report to the RCMP or that local police department is what they will have to do. a lot of us were not for C11. I mean, when I first heard about C11, I think it was like back in about 2020, I was very against the idea of it because the military needs to be able to govern itself. And I think it's a very slippery slope when we take sexual misconduct, being able to charge on that out of the system, because then what's next? What's next? So I think there's, again, I'm really concerned about this because, as we know, the civilian system is incredibly broken. And so we're putting people from one broken system into the next. And the percentage in the civilian courts of actually getting a conviction is so low. Like, I'm sorry, I don't know the statistic. And I believe Donna, who's been on here before, has said the statistic. And I think it's like less than 5%. It could even be, less than that. And again, who wants to go through the civilian system? Because again, the civilian system is so incredibly broken. So it's been very challenging being in the community, knowing that our voices were not heard on C11. And that was kind of the outcome of a lot of things, especially all of us that testified. We said, there should be a choice. There absolutely should be a choice onto whether or not you want a civilian court or a military court. But the government has decided that we don't have the capacity to make our own decision. And what was really interesting, I was just down in Las Vegas at the National Organization of Victim Advocates, and I sat in on a medical presentation about, here's how we handle our MST survivors. And in this presentation, everything was choice. It was complete choice, whether the person wanted to, pursue charges, whether they wanted photos taken, whether they wanted a rape kit done, that it was completely left in the hands of the survivors as to what they wanted and what was best for them. But in Canada, we don't even have that choice anymore. So honestly, I am scared to death of what's going to happen with the current, military, and what is this going to look like with C11 now and all the problems that we're having. Yeah, I'm very upset. I'm very disturbed by the whole thing.
Do you feel that when you testified that your words were actually heard by the people that can make the decisions and make the difference? Or do you think it was just a dog and pony show?
I would have to say in committee, it felt very much like lip service. Again, I'm not going to bash other parties, but certain people from other parties came up and they were like, oh, we understand the military. We support the military. I have family members who are in the military, and I totally get it. And what was very disingenuous is that they would come up to you and say, oh my gosh, you're so brave for testifying. It took such courageous. And no, it wasn't brave to testify. It wasn't, because we have no choice but to talk about our experiences, and it has nothing to do with bravery. It has to doing the right thing. So the first time, again, felt very, very, very disingenuous. And when I went back to Senate, I do have to say Senate is very different to testify at than committee. They actually gave us more time. And what I do have to say, I was very impressed over the Senate is they had a mental health professional on standby. And they also offered, if anybody needed counseling before, during, or after their time of testifying, that would be available to them. Where in the House of Commons, when you testify in committee, you don't have that support. You go, you tell your story, you leave, and then it's kind of like up to you to how do you process that? But I would have to say I did not feel heard in committee. In Senate, I felt I was heard, but I just don't think a big enough change was made for it. And I had some really good conversations after the Senate meeting where I spoke with a liberal who was a doctor for quite a few years, and we talked for about 10 minutes, and we talked with a few other people. Now, the only thing we did get that was positive with C11 was they are going to go back and look at it in 4 years. So, I mean, it's not a win, but at least it's something. So now that means for the next 4 years, we've got to stay on top of the government by stating, is it really working going to civilian court? Do we need to put it back into the military system? What is the best choice here for survivors? My opinion is it does need to go back into the military system because the military needs to be able to govern itself.
Now that we have a new chief of defense staff that's a woman, um, has there been any positive changes as a direct result of that?
When I talk with my daughter who's currently serving, what she's telling me, for example, you'll love this. So she called me when she was in basic training. And she called me up and she was all excited. And she says, Mom, I got some good news to tell you. She said, the work you guys are doing is making a difference. So I said, like, okay, how so? Please tell me. So she proceeded to tell me that when she went to clothing stores, she was measured by a woman. Now, back in the day when I served, men took advantage of measuring women and, their hands weren't in the most appropriate places when you got measured for your uniform. So she told me, she said, no, Mom, she said, women measure women. There are no men around when we get measured for our clothing. I went, that's fantastic. And she also told me that their quarters, that the doors were locked and that they were very they took a lot of this seriously is what they did. And then I think when she was halfway through basic training, she called me up one evening and she said, Mom, I got to tell you something. And she said, what I'm going to tell you didn't happen to me. So I was like, okay, please tell me, like, what's going on here, honey? And so she proceeded to tell me that her roommate had gotten sexually assaulted. And she was, she's like, what do I do? How do I support this girl? Like, what happens? And so she was telling me the female warrant officer who was in charge of the course immediately took this girl under their wing. They immediately got her treatment, counseling, and I believe the young man was charged right away and went to court right away. So I mean that is a bonus. And of course, some people would say, well, the civilian court system's working better here. But that's maybe just one case is what it was. So they are taking it more serious. And I think it just depends on the command on so many things as to, who's actually getting benefits from, kind of like the new protocol in regards to sexual misconduct and trauma. Because I've also heard cases where people have reported, bullying and harassment and nothing's being done about it. So I think it really depends on, again, who your chain of command is and how seriously do they take this.
There seems to be pros and cons to the changes in the culture of the military. There's the what some people call the wokeness of the military that doesn't seem to be very helpful. When the point of a military is to defend or assault with lethal force, and it's to kill. At the end of the day, you are either a killer or you are supporting the killers. That's the military, and they don't like to say it that way, but that's what it is. Guns aren't for hugging people. Bombs aren't for hugging people. Machine guns don't give you the Care Bear stare. The job is to kill, and that's it. So when you're in a kill or be killed environment, you have to be able to trust that the person next to you is sorted out, well trained, well prepared, and dependable, because you are literally putting your life in the hands of the person next to you. So lowering standards with the long shaggy hair of multiple colors and beards, which is weird because what are you going to do if there's a gas attack? Your mask doesn't work if you have a beard. That's why you have to be clean shaven. All these things. That's what I would say is a pretty strong downside. It's also bad for morale.
Yes.
Because what gives you pride is that you're working harder, that your poop is wired tight, and that you are more switched on than the others. That's what gives you pride. That's why the infantry people are made fun of by absolutely everybody that is not infantry, because
Yes,
because they do the hardest, because their poop has to be wired the tightest, except for special forces, of course. But
exactly.
the the infantry job is the toughest. It's the
Yeah.
most brutal. It's the one where you test yourself the most, and nobody that's honest is going to argue with that.
Mhm.
So if you soften that up, and then really being infantry isn't any tougher than being a tanker or artillery, well, where's the pride? Now that pride's gone. Now it's just like, meh, everybody gets a trophy.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
you know,
Hmm.
so that's a pretty strong downside. But
Yes.
the upside, I had General Wayne Eyre on when he was CDS.
Hmm.
Yeah, very lucky to get him on.
Yes.
And I told him the story of what happened to me in basic training, where in basic in Cornwallis in those days, the recruits wore coveralls and maybe your
Hmm.
skivvies underneath. And I was the lucky guy. Walked through the door. I got jumped by 5 or half a dozen guys. They thought it was a practical joke to tear off my coveralls and get a commercial grade vacuum cleaner and stick it on my junk, which really hurts apparently. Um, so I didn't think it was funny. I've never kicked and screamed so hard in my life, and the only reason I didn't, once they finally let me go, that I didn't knock out the guy that put that vacuum on me, is because there's half a dozen of them. What the hell am I going to do,
Yeah.
right? And so when I told him that story, he still called it hazing,
Mhm.
which I think is a little bit euphemistic. So uh, nowadays, but he also made it very, very clear that should that happen in today's military, his expectation is that it would be dealt with harshly,
Yes.
definitely not swept under the carpet. And it's just completely unacceptable, which I would hope. I would hope that it's unacceptable, because I sure as hell didn't think it funny. I'm still a little bit mad about it, to be honest. And do you think that there's positive changes like that for women as well? You just gave an example where it
Yeah.
seems at least a little hopeful.
Um, I think I have a little bit more hope for the Air Force, which kind of pains me being former Army. But, Kaylee's in the Air Force, and we were very strategic when, she said she wanted to join. Myself and John Sr. sat down with her and we were like, okay, the best place is the Air Force because they do treat their people the best. So, what I'm hearing from her and from she's in CFB Cold Lake, that they are taking, this type of stuff seriously. Her unit, especially. Again, I can't speak for, the entire country. I can't speak for the Army. I can't speak for the Navy, but I can at least speak on her experience, which she does see that they do take it seriously. And she called me again the other day asking me to explain C11, that her master corporal had never heard about C11, and he was really mad over the whole situation. He's like, how can they do this to survivors? So I think there's more of a conversation, I would think, going on in the Air Force. And again, I mean, I certainly hope it is going on in, the other elements as well, that, they're waking up and seeing that, sexual misconduct is a problem in the forces, and it still is a problem. And until we kind of start addressing this as like a human problem, and that there is a emotional and there's also a huge financial cost to losing someone who's trained up. um, so what I'm hearing from her is that her unit does take it seriously, because they've offered her a position, I think, in, I don't know what they call it, cultural and harassment or something like that. I don't know. There's so many new titles for everything nowadays. And they're allowing her to take different courses to, help those in her unit that have been affected by, the racism, the bullying, the harassment that, unfortunately still goes on.
Explain for the audience why there's a significant difference. And it's not playing the trauma Olympics by any stretch. It's
Yeah.
just, it really is different. Military sexual trauma versus the exact same incident as far as the physicality of it in civilian life? Like the same touch, the same
Mhm.
assault happens in civilian life versus military. How would you explain that difference?
The huge difference within the military, it's the power dynamics. When you
Yeah.
have somebody who is a higher rank than you that is doing something inappropriately, this person has your career in their hands. And, you and I are from the time period where we had, the personal evaluation report. Well, that person could turn around and rate you up the worst PER, and you'd be labeled the worst soldier in all of NATO. And there's also um, the forced teaming that goes on. So for example, you've got a master corporal who did something inappropriate and he knows that. And again, I'm just going to use he generally. Again, I know it's like male female, but then they're going to go to their sergeant, they're going to go to the captain and say, hey, did you see private so and so? They're a complete helmet fire, we need to get rid of them. So you see how it all plays out, and there's a lot of you know grooming that goes on with these, on how to get rid of somebody. And we do a little role play in our courses because we teach a military sexual trauma workshop, sorry. And we show how something as simple as a cup of coffee can kind of turn into something more. So for example, so a master corporal comes up to you, here's a cup of coffee, private, oh, great, thank you, you're being nice. And then little by little, well, that cup of coffee has now cost you, oh, I need you to do extra duties. Meanwhile, or maybe it's going up the chain of command. Maybe the master corporal goes to the sergeant and says, oh, here's a cup of coffee, sergeant, I was thinking of you this morning. And then they start that conversation of, again, oh, hey, private so and so is such a helmet fire, how do we get rid of them? And it's something as simple as that. Now, we did a role play in one of our courses one time. We had two RCMP officers sit on it, and one was a hostage negotiator. And by the end of it, the RCMP chaplain owed him everything, his house, his cars, whatever, in this little scenario that we were playing. That all started with, a cup of coffee. So we have these power dynamics that go on within the Canadian Armed Forces. And again, you don't necessarily have to go work with somebody, sleep next to somebody in the civilian world if that person raped or assaulted you. But it happens all the time within the military community that the very next day you're on duty with this particular person who caused you harm. And again, and how do you get out of that? Because you just can't walk in and say, I'm quitting my job, I'm filing a complaint, I want this taken care of. So either they do take it seriously, or I've seen it back when I was in, that the minute somebody reported a complaint, they were out of the military within 3 days, like instantly for filing a complaint. And there are safety things within the civilian world that, you go to your HR, you can move departments, maybe you can just be moved to another organization, and you've got the support of victim services, you've got the support of, your HR. Where in the military, when you report, right away they think you're the problem. Like, I got told when I reported bullying and harassment by my supervisor, I got asked, what's the matter, can't you take a joke? Can't you take a joke? And so this person continued to be my supervisor for a few years. And he actually wrote me one of the worst PERs of my life. I always tease everybody that I have the worst PER in all of NATO. It's what I have.
Oh, I don't know. I might be a close second.
But I do. I have one of the worst PERs in all of NATO. And again, it was, first of all, he shouldn't have been doing my PER. He should have been removed from the entire situation because I kept, reporting bullying and harassment on this guy. And he kept saying, well, it's just a joke. Like, can't you take a joke? So that's part of the problem is,
A classic narcissist response to accountability.
exactly. There was no accountability again. Or the other thing we always hear in the military, when especially a woman reports, it's like she's trying to ruin his career, which that one always made me shake my head, because do you know how hard it is to go to your supervisor to say, you know what, Master Corporal, Sergeant, so and so, is, harassing me, he's bullying me. It's a really hard thing to do because we're taught in the military, you do your job, you keep your mouth shut. And the time when I served, you don't rock the boat. You just didn't rock the boat, because if you did, you knew that would be career suicide. You absolutely knew that.
That's differently the same with males. I joined in '91, and that was absolutely the unspoken rule. The topic of grooming is something that makes people's eyes roll if they don't understand what it is. There's been a lot of talk about child sex trafficking, and people are like, it's a conspiracy theory. No, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's actually, and it's growing. And North Americans are the number one consumers of child sex trafficking. It's
Mhm.
a real thing. But in that same sort of camp is the idea of grooming. And I have heard grooming poo-pooed by the media again and again and again. And it's
Mhm.
a certain side of the media. It's not both sides of the media.
Right.
One side talks about it, the other side says it's not even a thing. It's a conspiracy theory. But no, it's real. Um, and I was hoping that you could talk about what grooming actually is and how it works.
What Again, it's interesting because this does come up in our military sexual trauma workshops, and we were kind of explaining. um Sorry, now I'm I'm doing the blank here. So when we do our workshops, everybody always wants to know, like, why did this happen? Why? And you're just going to end up like banging your head against the wall trying to figure out like the whys. But if we can explain how did this happen, that is such a game changer for survivors. So when we go into our workshops, we always say, how did this happen? So, for example, with grooming, say, in the reserve world, they can join at like, 16, 17. And we've seen it where 17-year-olds join and a higher rank takes an interest in them. So this person is always being pulled aside for special duty. Oh, well, come with me to, go pick up something from supply, get into the Jeep with me. We're going to go off and, do a recce. So it's something like that. It seems like, oh, okay, they're paying interest in this person. This is cool. And at 17, you don't really kind of know what you're doing because I mean, you joined the military, you have people yelling and screaming at you. So you don't know what to expect, what not to expect. And again, in one of our workshops, we always tell our attendees, like, not to flip tables, not to throw chairs. And we've seen it so many times where women are literally standing with their fingertips on the table, ready to flip it because they realized they had been groomed by the higher ranks. And, I've again heard stories of 17-year-olds joining the reserves. And again, higher ups take an interest in them and then keep taking them off to do different tasks, different, projects. Um, and I guess just because you don't know that it's wrong type of thing, um, if that makes sense. So again, so the grooming is being alone with this person with the higher rank. um, Sorry, now I'm blanking, Mark.
And no, it's okay. There's a few different examples in my head because I try to think about conversations that I've
Yeah.
had where people are just baffled and where I would get angry with them when really I shouldn't be because they just if they knew better they'd do better.
Yeah.
One example is my good friend Theo Fleury, the NHL hockey player who was raped 150 times by his coach. And a friend of mine says, well, how do you rape a 15-year-old boy? Like a strapping high level athlete that can fight back? Like, how is that even possible? Like, you just fight. And I wanted to punch him so bad, even though he's the sweetest man. But but I get it. I get where people's head goes. But that's why I wanted to talk about the grooming process that gets you to a point um, where Theo was raped 150 times, as was Sheldon Kennedy, and like how does that by Graham James, who eventually went to jail for it, but it's a step by step process, and in that particular case, there's a power disparity. The keys to the NHL were in the hands of Graham
Yeah.
James, and plus he's the coach. He's the authority figure. And in my case, grooming started when I was 7,
Mhm.
and it when I was 7, an older family member, it is kind of like flirting in a
Mm.
way, but where they just test the waters, see how far they can push the boundary. And it's so gradual. It's like frog in the boiling water. You don't
Yes.
even realize it. And when it comes from an authority figure, now in my case, my dad, who's now passed away, my dad wasn't really a dad. He was a provider, but I wasn't raised. So I raised myself. So I didn't have any lessons. I didn't have that father figure to tell me how the world works. I didn't have a father to father me, right? I had older family members. That was my window into adulthood. Like, like, how do I think? How do I act? What should I believe? The keys to that world, to that adult world, were not held by my dad. So I went wherever I could. And there was actually no affection from my dad. And no sense of, you're a good boy. I believe in you. There was none of that. It was the opposite. So a predator can smell that. And
Yes.
it's always kids like me. It's always kids like me that are looking for that approval from an older figure. And in this case, an older family member uh, and that predator never looks like a wolf,
No, you're right.
right?
Hmm.
It looks like the ice cream salesman.
Hmm.
And so this family member took an interest in me, befriended me, and said nice things and encouraged me. It was just really, really nice. And so I loved this guy.
Yeah.
I loved him so much because tell me how the world works.
Hmm.
you know, he held the keys to my adulthood. So uh, when he would start to say odd things, I go, "What?"
Mm.
um, that's weird, but he would plant seeds. And there's something in a predator, even a young predator,
Yes.
that they just know how to do it. Just like flirting comes natural. It's sort of it's a predatory type of flirting. Flirting is a non-predatory way of testing the waters to see if there's any mutual interest. But doing the same thing as a predator, it's different. It's a pursuit of a goal, and inch by inch, and it can take years. Grooming can literally take 5
Absolutely.
years before any action happens, right? Sometimes longer. And the predator just keeps knocking at the door until that chicken coop opens up.
And again, like, oh,
And
sorry, and like you were saying too, like, sorry, with the military, same thing. It again, it's so simple. Again, just someone being nice. And when we go into the military, I think so many of us are so very young. We're so naive. We don't know. We just don't know. We think, oh, we're just going to go join the military, and we're going to go like save the world. But that's not the space you expect to see predators. But they're there, and again, they're so slick, as you said. Again, it starts out very simply with, cup of coffee, oh, a hug, or maybe, you're sitting at a desk and somebody comes by and just rubs your shoulder. And so it's the simple stuff that starts like that. And then as it kind of gets more serious, sometimes people just don't even know what to do, because when we were in, there was no place to report. I think when I was in, if there was a sexual misconduct that happened, it had to happen during work hours. It couldn't happen after work hours. It had to happen on the base. Even if something happened on the military quarters, there was nothing you could do, with these guys. And I mean, I've heard cases of guys getting somebody's name off the nominal roll and then showing up at their home again with that whole premise of, I'm here to be nice, I want to be your friend. um, so again, you are so right.
well, it also provides protection, camouflage for the predator,
Yes.
right? So the predator keeps walking this line where, what? I'm just being compassionate. Oh, excuse me for being nice,
Yes.
right? So they and they could stay in that camouflage position like a sniper until it's time to take that shot. When they figure that they have enough cover that they can make the move and get away with it.
Absolutely. And this is again part of the problem within the military system in the past is that they did everything to protect the male. So again, when someone came forward, it's like, oh well, can't you take a joke? Are you really trying to ruin this guy's career? They were more worried about his career than this person possibly being a predator. So the military just has made it an easier place for these guys to continue doing what they're doing, preying on young women, and again, I know both sexes, but, I've heard cases of, you know, two women were assaulted by the same guy and they live on opposite ends of the country.
And I asked before the difference between civilian and military sexual assault and grooming. And people have to remember when you're in the regular force, you're under contract. You
Yes,
can't leave, because people, well, why didn't you just quit? You fucking
you
can't.
can't.
It doesn't work like that.
No,
You can put in a 6-month request and then you're still on the bubble for 6 months. But you can't just leave.
no.
And why should it be you that has to be the one to leave? Like if you've just invested even 5 years into a 25-year career, that's a 5-year investment.
Mm.
5 years invested is a lot of frickin' time
Yes,
towards your chosen profession. Why should that get fucked up by some asshole?
exactly.
Fuck you, these people that are like, why don't you just quit? It's unbelievable.
It's not that simple. Like for me, I didn't want to quit after I reported the harassment, the bullying, the abuse. I didn't report the sexual misconduct because there was nothing I could have done in that time period. They wouldn't have believed it anyhow. So even reporting bullying and harassment, um, it went nowhere. It literally went nowhere. And like I said, I didn't want to quit, but I had just gotten to the point where I was so emotionally tired. I had nothing left to give. And I can remember after 5 years just feeling completely devastated, sitting on my kitchen floor crying because it's like, this was all I ever wanted to do was to join the military and to serve my country. And, now I'm out because of, some guy is just, a complete asshole type of thing. And of course, the irony with these guys is they eventually do get caught. And, this guy served a couple more years. And then they were complaining about what a horrible soldier he was. And it was again, there's so much craziness in all of it. It really is. And again, it's always the wrong people that get released. It's always the wrong people that get protected. And it's so sad. And I think we've lost some amazing people within the Canadian Armed Forces that could have been some really amazing, soldiers and sailors and airmen and stuff like that, due to these few predators. Because I know some people think that, all men are predators in the military, and they're not. Not all men are the problem. It's just that small percentage is the problem, and they kept getting protected within the system.
Well, it's also the men that see it and turn a blind eye.
Yes.
They're just as big of a problem as the predators. Because like what we said earlier, don't want to rock the boat. The consequences for a man who sees another man being a predator are pretty high. Not as high as the woman who's the victim of the assault making the complaint and coming forward, but it's still pretty high. It's still a career ender because the military term is blade. Oh, he bladed him.
Yeah,
And it's not likely to go well for that person that stood up and said, "Hey, get the hell away from her, asshole."
exactly.
That and it's sort of this unspoken knowledge that, oh man, this is an all-in move if I open my mouth.
And I seen that myself personally, because again, young, new private, not even hooked. I was, serving at an officer's mess dinner, and for them, they're just like, everything's on the menu, if you know what I mean. And I can remember, seeing a female captain sitting at the table, and the look on her face as those of us are serving, are putting up with like inappropriate comments and touching and stuff. She didn't say a word, and at first I was really angry for quite a few years. Like, why didn't she say something? Why didn't she speak?
Because she was in the same
She was
position.
in the same position, because had she spoke up
Yeah.
as a captain, at this event, she would have again faced the same thing that I would have done had I said anything. So it's again, it's a hard place to be. I'm not angry at her anymore, but at the time I was really confused. Like, why isn't another human being saying, this isn't appropriate? You shouldn't be talking to young privates like this, because some of them technically were like underage. Like, you shouldn't be, asking them sexual questions, period.
It's funny when you were saying that the Air Force is the safest place. I don't know that I agree with that at all. Like, I don't know if the stats bear it out. I mean, you'd have to look at the stats. I don't know what they are, but in my experience, I mean, I was in the 3rd Battalion PPCLI when it was. I mean, it's still a high speed, low drag unit, but then it was ridiculous. Like, we were more fit than the airborne, and it was high octane. There was also a code, and there was a woman that the first woman in the infantry, as far as I know, that served with us. She completed her 3 years and got out. And I would listen. I got there just after she left, so I never had the honor of meeting her. But the way the guys would talk about her, the vast majority of them were super supportive and protective
Hmm.
of her reputation, even though she wasn't physically there, right? And I think some of it is because our colonel in chief was Lady Patricia,
Hmm.
Countess Mountbatten of Burma. So
Yes.
it was a matriarch. Uh, Maybe that had something psychologically to do with it, because we just adored this woman, and I never heard anybody ever say anything lewd or disrespectful in the slightest. It'd be worth your life, just about. Like, you're definitely guaranteed a beating if anybody was stupid enough to disrespect that woman.
Yes.
So maybe that's why it was. But the amount of respect for this lady infanteer was significant. And even to this day, if I don't even remember her name, because I never met her, but if it comes up, people are like, "Yep, good soldier. That's all I care." So the hardest chargers seem to be the most protective, and I
Mm-hmm.
think it's more of a Patricia thing than it is with the Royals. Definitely more than the Van Deus. Sandra Perrin was a Van Dew, and
Hmm.
that's a completely different culture.
Yes.
So she had a rough ride, a really rough ride, and I think that was the culture of the unit, you know. But it's in the Air Force, you'll get the more beta male group, and those tend to be the worst predators. I jokingly say the beta male cucks. Just they are the most dangerous, because they walk around not feeling powerful. So when there's an opportunity for them to feel powerful, well, the predators will take that opportunity. Uh, I, well, the greatest predator in Canadian Armed Forces history, an Air Force colonel,
Yes.
right? And he was straight up psycho. And how many did he kill? Ray, God,
Yeah.
it was horrific.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I do agree with you on that one. I think it's, maybe the individual, sections and stuff. Like, you are right. Like, I've heard of a lot of combat, um, sorry, my mind just blanks. A lot of
It's all right.
combat arms are very protective, of the women that serve with them. They're very, very protective. I think sometimes, like, when you get like an entire, regiment, you know, you get again those problems. But if you're with a really tight knit group, I think they are more protective of their female counterparts.
Well, I noticed it when I served in a war zone. The the female staff that comprised of locals, so the local women, and there was no horseplay there. Inappropriate anything. It was dealt with not by leadership, but by each other. It's like, no, don't do that, or don't say that. No, you will be respectful. And that was of people of equal rank. Like, we enforced it amongst ourselves. And it was well known. It was well known, and it was well respected that these women are here to do a job. They're not to be mistreated, and that's that. And they weren't. They were greatly respected. It was a good work environment for them, even though we're in the middle of a war zone. So, yeah, because here we are, all combat veterans at the time, and nothing to prove. There's nothing to prove. We felt powerful because we were powerful. And that's a Jordan Peterson thing. It's like, you can't be good and weak. Mm-hmm. You can only be good if you're strong and you know how to keep it in check. Predators are not strong people. No. Predators are weak people. They are too weak to resist their impulses. They are too weak to not be a predator. Mm-hmm. Like, being a predator is it's a mental weakness. There's something deeply wrong with somebody that needs to be a predator, that has that prey drive.
Yeah, it's a power thing. Power.
It's a power thing. Yeah. Absolutely, it's a power thing. If you feel powerless, you're going to find a way to compensate for that. Whether it's, I'm a hero in the video games. Mm-hmm. You should see my body count in Call of Duty. Yes. Or porn addiction. Mm-hmm. It's, well, maybe that's a bad example, but Call of Duty is a good example. Yeah. And that's why all men should be trained in martial arts. They should all be in the gym. They should all be physically strong, because physically strong leads to mentally strong, and all have habits that make them mentally strong, habits of discipline, because that's where self-respect comes from. And I don't believe that you can have self-respect and be a predator. I just don't. And that's how I've always seen it. I don't know if you disagree or not.
I do agree with you, because I think there's, at the root of so much of predatory behavior is a lack of self-esteem. They want to be, especially when we look at it in military context. You've already said it, Call of Duty. You always get those people who think, they're better than, or, they embellish their careers type of thing, as to what they are. So, I mean, we know when people join the military, there's a couple of different reasons that they join it. Like, number one, they're looking for a replacement family, someplace to belong, someplace to, be that better person. And then some, join the military because it's, a family thing, it's a tradition thing, and then some.
Or a motorcycle gang.
Exactly. That, or,
it really is the same idea. It's yes. Really the same for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. You either join a gang and be a criminal, join the military, try to be a hero.
Yes.
It's something.
So when you get these guys who already have like low self-esteem, they don't feel good about themselves, or, again, there's, a lot of abusers have been abused themselves as children, statistics mm-hmm. tell us that. So then when you get into this culture, when there's so few women in it and they make it easy to be a predator, well, no wonder we're kind of where we're at, when they're, almost rewarding the bad behavior. For the longest time, the military would reward it. You step on people to, get promoted up. Well, good on you back in the 80s and the 90s, so it's, I do agree with you. Like, it really is a self-esteem thing. And I would be, kind of curious to kind of know some of these people's backgrounds. As to kind of like, were they abused as children? Were they bullied as children? And do they just see their uniform as a way to, take their power back?
Compassion and understanding is not saying it's okay.
No,
You
oh
know,
gosh, no, I'm not saying it's
having
okay.
no, I know you're not, but
Yeah.
I can hear people chirping in the comment section before this even post, right?
Yeah,
Um, Having compassion and understanding for why somebody is the way they are is not an excuse.
totally
It is
agree.
not a free pass
Yes,
by any stretch of the imagination. And
totally
most
agree.
people I find can't hold two opposing thoughts in their head at the same time. You
Hmm.
know, people are just too simple for it. That might sound a little harsh, but it's just true. Most people are too simple to hold two opposing thoughts in their head at the same time.
Hmm.
And this is one of those cases. Do I have some degree of compassion? Well, it's more understanding than compassion for the predators, but the more you understand it, then you can spot it. You
Yes.
know, it's like, oh, okay, this person that totally fits the profile now that I
Hmm.
know. You know, they don't look like a Disney villain wringing their hands going, whoa.
No, no,
You
they
know,
don't.
you don't always know.
No, and you don't. And again, this is why, like with our military sexual trauma course, we talk about what does it look like to be a predator. And again, you're absolutely right. It's not, the evil guy lurking around in the dark corners type of thing. These are people that you work with that are the predators, that are causing, all of the trauma. So again, this is why it's so important to educate people on, how does all of this happen? How does this happen? And one of the things we teach in our workshops, you're probably very familiar with Colonel Grossman's work, about the sheepdog, the sheep, and the wolf. And it's really interesting when you get into the military community that the majority of people in the military community are sheepdogs, and you only get, like, what is it, the 3 or 4% that are the sheep, and then you get like the 1% wolf in there is what you get. It's reversed from like the civilian community. And so again, we see it. So the majority of people, in the military are good people. They are, again, trying to either like make themselves better, have a good career, or to make the world a better place to serve their country. So
Everybody in the military is willing to give their life for the life of somebody else.
yes.
And that's, I don't care if you're a clerk in the Air Force or
Hmm.
if you're an infantry, we all signed the same contract.
Yes, we
You know,
did. Hmm.
and when you look at the wall of, what is it, 165 dead Canadians from Afghanistan,
Yeah.
they're all trades.
Yes,
They're all
absolutely.
trades, from infantry to clerk and everything in between.
Yes, absolutely.
What? Yeah, we'll get the producer to cut this part out. Um, Jeez, today, I think it's the topic. Maybe we won't cut that gap out. You know, it's just such a big topic that we're
It
talking about
is.
today, and I think that's why I've been brain farting, because I'm really trying to treat it with reverence, if that
And I
makes sense.
appreciate it does, and I appreciate it, Mark. And like what hasn't been said is, I don't think like the civilian community even understands, and I don't even think sometimes some people in the military community understands the level of trauma sexual misconduct causes. It's not just the
Mm.
actual incident. It goes so much deeper than that. So then when you go to command and you complain to command and you get dismissed, and you go to Veterans Affairs and you get dismissed, and it's nonstop. So many of MST survivors are still stuck in their trauma, even though it was 30, 40 years ago, because it's still going on, the abuse. It just may look different. Like, I have many survivors that come to me, and again, this is not to dismiss their trauma. They will actually say, I could have gotten over the rape if command would have taken me seriously,
Yeah.
if I could have stayed in my job, if Veterans Affairs would believe me, if the medical profession would believe me. And so I'll just give you another for example.
Well, because it
I
gets
know
amplified by the sanctuary trauma.
exactly. And
The sanctuary trauma makes it worse, so much
exactly.
worse.
And then what happens too, especially for females, is females are misdiagnosed in Veterans Affairs. So the majority of females are either diagnosed borderline personality disorder or bipolar, seems to be the ones they like to go to, instead of post-traumatic stress. Getting raped does not give you borderline personality disorder. It gives you post-traumatic stress. So the survivors, again, both men and women, are even having a hard time just even getting the right diagnosis. So I understand your reason for struggling on this is because it is so complex and there's so many layers to it that the military is missing. Now, for myself personally, I work with a lot of MST survivors that, we haven't even had this conversation yet, that resorted to the sex trade when they got out because the military didn't consider them real veterans. They wouldn't give them benefits. They were denied. So some of these women felt, well, you know what? I've already been used in the military. I might as well just go into the sex trade. At least I can support myself. Or I see women going into organizations saying, you know what, I need help. And standing there getting, the blink, 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 blink. Okay, where's the veteran? And and again, it just adds so much layers of trauma to all of it when there's the misdiagnosis, when there's not being believed, when, the medical community won't believe them, and so many things. So again, I understand your struggle of how do we address this in such a short time?
Back in the beginning of Alberta Recoil, I've had John on the show from the beginning half a dozen times over the last 7 years.
Yes.
Where is Alberta Recoil now? For the benefit of the audience, tell us what the company Alberta Recoil is and what it does.
Okay, well, I'm just going to digress a little bit because there's a piece, I don't know if you know this, how we kind of got started with our military sexual trauma workshop, our military sexual trauma peer support, and I'd love to share that. So
Sure.
back in 2020, I was just going through like a really nasty divorce, and there was just a whole bunch of crazy things going on in my life. And I was attending another peer support organization who were absolutely lovely and very supportive, and I had accidentally slipped the one day and said that I was part of the sexual misconduct class action lawsuit. And this person paused and they went, oh gee, we're really sorry, we can't have you in group anymore. I'm like, oh, okay, no problem, so where do I go for help? And he gave me some resources, but none of these resources could help me as a veteran. And at the time, I had even phoned the Sexual Misconduct and Response Center because when they first started, they were supposed to be for currently serving members only. And when I called them up and I said, hey, I'm a veteran, I've experienced military sexual trauma, where do I go for support? And they said, we're sorry, we can't take you because you're a veteran. So I ended up writing a letter to the ombudsman, and
Was
their
it
office.
Nishika or was it somebody else?
Yes, yeah, it was Nishka.
It was
And
Nishika at
so,
the time.
yeah, so they wrote me back and they said, hey, I think we want to do a report on this. I'm like, okay, sure, I'll give you whatever information you need. And I was really careful with them. And I said, okay, the person who initially removed me, please protect him at all costs. This is not his fault. I don't want him blamed for this because he is just an amazing human being and he is just doing what his higher ups told him to do. So they said, okay. So I woke up June 2021. My phone is ringing off the hook. It's John Sr. He said, I've gotten no less than 9 phone calls about you this morning. Start looking in social media. My story hit the media, is what it did in June of 2021. And it was the story on sexual misconduct or MST survivor denied peer support. And at that time, the SMSRC still didn't have their peer support up and running. And when my story hit, of course, members of parliament stood up and they promised like $2 million for MST survivor support and, all of this. And it's just been taking the government forever to, do this. So I had approached John Sr. and a social worker, and I said, would you guys create for me a military sexual trauma peer support group? And of course, they jumped on it and they said, absolutely, we will. And one thing I am so proud of that we took ours a little bit further, because we know as military, if we're not getting the supports and services, we know our CMP's getting even less, and then we know other uniforms are even getting like nothing. So we decided to open up our service sexual trauma group, as we call it, to all uniforms. So we have every uniform in our MST group. We've got corrections, we've got fire, we've got, we just don't care. Whatever uniform you served in, you're welcome in our space. So this was kind of the start of, Alberta Recoil. And, we just decided that, we didn't want there to be a duty to report, which was still such a big deal, and there still was that duty to report if you called the SMSRC, and there should never be that pressure on a person. So we said, okay, this is our whole reason for going private, is we don't want to put someone in a position where they don't have to do something they don't want to do, like reporting and things like that. And we just wanted it to be that completely safe space. So we did that. So we've been doing the peer support since, 2020. John Sr., of course, has been doing it a lot longer. But the MST group, when it first started, we had 5 women, of all different uniforms come. And it was so refreshing, because when you attend other peer groups, yes, it talks to the betrayal injury, it talks to the institutional trauma, all of that, but you can't really get to like the root of the problem. So with the MST group or the SST group, like women could come in there and say, you know what, I got into an elevator today and I was triggered by someone's aftershave. So we all know in that room, what that means, because again, and you've seen our peer groups too, Mark, and we don't discuss trauma, we don't trauma dump, that's between you and your therapist. We want to help you with the day-to-day stuff. And many of our MST survivors are still struggling day to day. So the peer group, like I said, was really like our initial, that's all we did. And in 2023, Marie Blackburn from the Veterans Association Food Bank came to John and myself and said, I've got this money that is designated strictly for MST survivors. I would like you guys to come up with a program for it. So this is how our military sexual workshop trauma, or military sexual trauma workshop started. So we said, okay, let's fly in people from all across Canada, which we did. And we said, we're going to fly them in with their partner. We will pay for babysitting. We'll pay for dog sitting. We will pay whatever it takes to get these survivors here to Alberta. So we held the workshop split between Edmonton and Calgary. And when we were said and done, we put through about 80 people through our workshop. Again, no expenses paid. And, I went out all Air Force when I booked hotels and food and everything, that there was going to be no stress for these people. All they had to do was get on a plane and come to us. And some of our survivors, sorry, it makes me a little bit emotional here. One of our survivors at the end of the first day, or at the end of the 3-day workshop, she comes downstairs and she's wearing a dress. And she's so excited to wear a dress. And she comes bounding up to me and she said, "It's okay to be a woman." And I said, "It is." And this particular woman had been sleeping in her closet for about the past 15 years. And I'm so happy to say she no longer sleeps in the closet. And she
that's literal, by the way, audience. That's not figurative.
That is literal. No, that's not figurative. She literally slept in a closet because that was the only place she felt safe in her home. And so she bounded up to me and she was like, "It's okay to be a woman." And I was like, oh my gosh, yes, it is. And we've also had stories of an artist who was holed up in his basement for years. He has now opened a brick and mortar art gallery.
Wow.
Is what he's done. And again, we're, and we hear stories like this all the time. And again, what we're doing, Mark, is not magic. It's nothing special. We are just there meeting the survivors where they're at, saying, you know what, if you want to use the word fuck, use the word fuck. You want to get angry. Just don't flip tables and chairs. That's the only thing we ask.
Yeah, there is a line.
There is a line, because we don't want to pay for tables and chairs. But meeting these people where they're at, and we're not telling them what to think, what to feel. You want to be angry, you want to be sad, you want to cry, you cry. And what we've also done with our peer support as well is John, Laryssa, and I are very trained across Canada. We have training in the US. We also have international training. So we haven't just gone and taken like a 2 week, peer support course and call it a day. We also have insurance and we have clinical oversight.
My course
So
was four days in Montreal.
right? Yeah,
And it was
yeah.
terrible.
So
It was
I
so
remember
useless.
that.
It was so useless.
So we have done
Yeah.
that. And even just with our clinical oversight, he is right there in the room with the survivors. He'll meet with them afterwards, just to get them through. So we've really thought things out, like how can we keep this such a safe space for these survivors to come? So we've done the workshops. Unfortunately, we don't receive funding from the federal government. We have tried so many times, and we've been denied now, I think, for the fourth time is what we have been. So to be 100%.
And the poppy funds are sewn up tighter than a frog's butt. They won't, and they have a blacklist. I learned because I joined the Legion just so I could learn more about that and to try to crack open the poppy fund. And I'm not one to give up, but I gave up because I can't even get a return call from Dominion Command to get them on the show. I've been trying for 7 years to get Dominion Command on the show. I can't get them on the show. They won't come on because of accountability. And now that I know the truth about the Poppy Fund, it's I know there's a lot of Legion defenders, but the Poppy Fund, even though I have personally benefited from it, and I won't pretend otherwise, it's largely a fraud because our little tiny Legion in Stettler has like 90 grand in the bank in the Poppy Fund. And every time they try to spend it, it's a bureaucratic wall that they can't. And there's certain like the Veterans Association Food Bank that you mentioned, they will not, they are blacklisted. They will not benefit from the Poppy Fund. Canadian Legacy Project is blacklisted. And God knows how many more are blacklisted. And that was said at a district meeting to my face by the district commander. So it's not my imagination.
Well, well, I'm going to say that we have been very fortunate as Alberta Recoil that the Legion has funded two of our programs, and again, if it wasn't
district
for
command
them,
or the or individual branches.
the Horton Road Legion
Okay.
has given us funding to do our last workshop and our up and coming one. But I think what like a lot of people don't realize, like with John and I, we're both DEC'd, and
So
we don't get funded.
for the audience, because so am I. DEC is diminished earning capacity. So it is a veteran's benefit that acknowledges that you simply don't have the ability to keep a job. Totally true in my case. Despite
Exactly.
all of my brilliance and all of my, I can't keep a job for shit. And
John and I are in the same boat. So.
Yeah, and I've got a track record that proves it. So
Yes.
DEC acknowledges that and compensates you for that.
Exactly. So for us, this is essentially what's keeping the lights on at Alberta Recoil. And
Same here. This show
we're
wouldn't exist without it.
Exactly. So that's kind of where we're at. We are very, grateful. We do receive some funding and some support from the Veterans Association Food Bank. We also receive a little bit of funding from Wayfinders Wellness, but there's so much more that we could do as an organization if we were to receive government funding, because we've had people on a waiting list for a very long time to take our military sexual trauma workshop. And we've had communities ask us like, well, can you guys fly out here? Because some of our people can't, travel. It's too hard when you've got kids and pets and, elderly parents and whatever it may be. And, and it's a frustrating piece because, we know our program works. We know it helps people. We just don't have sorry, I have a visitor. My cat just came in. So um, we know we could help more people, but we're just not getting the funding, in any way, shape, or form. And it's frustrating because, we are ticking all of the boxes. We are, MST specific, we are trauma informed, we have clinical oversight, we have insurance, we're very trauma attuned and trauma informed when we do our, our workshops. And we're very careful to keep these programs very safe, very secure. And yet, we can't get funding. And it's frustrating at times. It's very, very frustrating. um you
So
know
I'm going to throw out there right now for anybody listening that has any videographer skills. If you are a videographer and you believe in supporting the veteran community and peer support and what Heather and John Sr. do with Alberta Recoil, get a hold of them and offer your services for free to put together a commercial for Alberta Recoil, showing the benefits of peer support and the lives saved and saving lives and relieving pain. We're all on the same mission. So to make a commercial with a donation ask at the end of the commercial with some kind of GoFundMe. Um, Please, some videographer that's listening to this, get a hold of them, get this done for them so that they can do a proper GoFundMe and keep the lights on.
and literally that is what it is some days.
Well,
That
with
it
the
is.
price of electricity and
It's
fuel, yeah.
it absolutely is. And for us, having an office space is like so important, because it's, again, it's away from the eyes of, the food bank. It's a great space, but there's a lot of people coming and going. And an MST survivor doesn't necessarily want to walk through that space, by saying, oh, look, they're going to, a military sexual trauma peer group. So we like kind of being on our own, because again, it just gives that extra layer of privacy. And, John has even had, RCMP, stop by after hours to have chats with him, because again, they don't want the command to know, even though nowadays everyone's all about, oh, we're so accepting of, mental health issues, good for speaking up. But I still think there's still so much of a stigma still attached to it. And, people are so worried about their careers, and they just don't want that to be a problem.
I've got spinning in my head right now different legions that I want to knock on the door of and say, hey, cut a check to Alberta Recoil.
Well, thank
I met John Sr., and for anybody that's a new listener, you haven't heard this yet, but John Sr., I met him way back in 2017. In
Mhm.
2017, right at the beginning of my healing journey, and tapped on my shoulder and says, "Hey, man, we got this peer support thing. You should show up." And I was like, "I roll, yeah, whatever, man. Hold hands and sing Kumbaya." No,
Mhm.
you know, but I did show up because he was persuasive, and it changed my life. And after whatever it was, a year or so of peer support, I ended up. John needed a break, so I took over for him. So even though I was very hesitant in the beginning, I ended up running the damn thing for a while and getting my course in Montreal, and it ran its course for me. I did peer support for however many years that was, and I said, okay, well, that's enough for me, and I put it in its place and continued on without it. But it served its purpose for me over the course of years and made a world of difference. And I watched it make a world of difference in the lives of many, many other people, and is actually the reason that this show exists. This show exists once I realized just how important peer support was. The first 10 episodes are all peer support related
Mhm.
episodes so that we could scale it and share it around the world. So from John Sr. tapping me on the shoulder, this show was created and is now listened to in over 100 countries, 100 countries around the world, all because John Sr. started it by tapping me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, man, want to hold hands and sing Kumbaya?"
Yes, exactly. And no, and you're so right, Mark. Peer support for a lot of people, it's that gateway into getting the mental health and the other supports we need. Because for me, I kind of fell into peer support accidentally is what I did. And, because I just didn't think, well, it didn't apply to me because I'm a clerk, and I just thought it was, combat injured males sitting around, discussing their traumas. And when I got into peer support, I was like, oh my gosh, these guys were so amazing that I was there. And I can remember, the first time sharing a couple of experiences about, being a clerk. And I remember the guys getting so mad. They were like, oh my gosh, I wouldn't have treated you that way.
I
Or,
would have punched that guy in the nose.
exactly. And I'd never had that before. So it was quite, interesting. And, for me, I was one of these women who was, misdiagnosed when I got out of the military. And, I was doing the medication, I was doing everything, these civilian doctors had told me to do. And I too remember, first time sitting with John Sr. privately, and he looked at me and he said, you don't have, bipolar. I'm like, okay, what do I have? He said, you have angry corporal syndrome. I was like, what? Angry corporal syndrome. Like,
Yes, the dreaded AGS.
And so once he explained it to me, I was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I have. And I said, I'm its president, and he didn't even need to hear my story. He says, I don't need to know all the details. He said, I can just see that you are so angry. And I was, because I was angry at being, dismissed by the military, of, the sexual misconduct, of the bullying, the harassment, of
Heather, that's a T-shirt. Angry corporal syndrome. That's totally a T-shirt. You should call the Corporal for Life guy and
exactly
and get that done up.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
We Got Your Six Apparel. They're out of Airdrie, veteran owned. Both it's a veteran couple. They're both veterans, and whip up Angry Corporal Syndrome T-shirt.
Sign me up. I will gladly take and wear the T-shirt proudly. So.
Shout out to We Got Your Six Apparel, who made this hoodie for me.
Love it.
It's beautiful. And get a hold of Todd Carstairs and his wife. We Got Your Six Apparel out of Airdrie and make those Angry Corporal Syndrome T-shirts. I could just
sell them.
So good. So good.
Yeah. No, so that was kind of my fall into, peer support. And, I'm so grateful for it, because again, it gave me that safe space that I could come and I could process, like, what was I feeling? What was I thinking? So when I went to see my therapist, once I found a good one, I already had processed it. So it was easier to kind of start peeling back those, layers of, why am I so angry? Why am I, feeling so hurt, so betrayed? And again, I'm just so grateful for it. And then, of course, for me personally, it went from the peer support to being involved in the sexual misconduct class action. Now, if you would have asked me in, I don't know, 2017, 18, whenever the class action happened, I just wanted to put in my claim and just be done with it. I didn't want to.
What was the end result of that? I never got around to joining it, but what was the end result?
So the end result, there was about 25,000 people that put in a claim. 60% were women, 40% were men. And I think the men could have been far higher than the women.
Yeah, most of them were like me that just didn't even want to.
Exactly. Didn't even want to go there. So that was, I think, 2019. Again, my dates are kind of fuzzy and I do apologize over that. And so it took a couple of years to get the payouts. Now, the problem with the class action, it was never meant to make anybody rich. And people knew that going into it, that
it's more to make a point.
More to make a point. Exactly. So there was a lot of problems with the class action itself. Like, for example, it was like a 30-page application. Okay. So first of all, it's really hard for traumatized people to read this. And it actually took me over a year to do my application.
And you're a super clerk.
You know what? I can't do my own stuff. I can't do my own stuff. I can do everybody else's paperwork, no problem. But when it came
Yeah.
to doing my own, I couldn't do it. I actually had to sit with John Sr., and him and I worked on it for a year. Now, part of the problem with the class action was it stated very clearly in it, you had to list the harm you've experienced. So some people just took it as a platform to tell all the incidents that they had happened. So one particular woman basically wrote a 300-page dissertation of all the sexual misconduct she experienced. But if she didn't explain the harm that happened to her, it would have resulted in a lesser payment, is what
Exactly.
it was.
Got to
So
show
I
the
know
impact.
you got to show the impact. So for me, I think when mine was said and done, it was about 16 pages that we put in, and 10 of it was initially the harm that I experienced from the sexual misconduct. And again, it was a really hard, process. Now, for me, again, I consider myself very fortunate that the adjudicator I got who read my final, claims, she was incredibly lovely. She was a former lawyer, human rights advocate, I believe. She wrote me a lovely response back, basically verifying that, yes, this did happen to me. And she was so incredibly sorry. And I did initially get the highest payout. Now, I know there were some people who, because maybe they didn't list it as well, and another person who, again, whoever adjudicated it, ended up victim shaming this particular person. So
Ugh.
it wasn't perfect by no means, and I know there were still a lot of people that were hurt even just doing the class action. So they had,
Yeah.
say, 30 days to go back and appeal. Well, who's got that capacity to go back and do an appeal on something that probably took people like a year to, complete? So for me, like I said, I did the class action, I put it in, but then what I was seeing within the community was that survivors had nothing left. Like they just had nothing left emotionally. And so I thought, well, you know what? I'm in a little bit better space myself. I thought, I'm going to start speaking up about the, military sexual trauma, which was really hard for me because I had never spoken about my own experiences within the military, that not even my ex-husband was even aware of one of the incidences that happened. So it was really hard for me to, come forward and speak about some of this stuff.
Was it helpful
From
once you did? Like as previously mentioned, my friend Theo Fleury says,
Yeah,
it's our secrets that make us sick, and I believe that's true.
I completely believe that because I had kind of hung on to this for so long. And I can even remember I had, even like almost changed the narrative in my head, if that makes sense. That
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
say, well, maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe I was imagining it,
Gaslight
maybe
yourself.
I
Yeah.
gaslit myself for the longest time. So it was very therapeutic for me to take that year to write out, this whole experience on paper. It was really, really challenging, to actually process it. Like, okay, like what really did happen? And of course, I struggled with one of the incidences because um, I don't have full memory of the incident, and I thought for the longest time, well, that meant, maybe it wasn't that bad, or, maybe,
It's
I made this,
exactly the
I
opposite.
made it. And that's exactly what my therapist said to me. He said,
Yeah.
because you do have memory loss on some of this, he said, that tells me that you really did experience this traumatic event. And the fact that you can't remember, he said, it's okay. He said, you may never remember. And
I
I'm
have
like,
several memory blocks from Croatia. Several.
exactly, exactly. So I did that, and so I said, okay, I've got to speak out more. And so one of the things I had happened during the class action was you were finally allowed to put in military sexual conduct into Veterans Affairs. So part of the agreement of the class action was you had to file for VAC benefits. So I said, okay, so we're going to put this military sexual trauma in it. And I said, I'm only going to list like 3 incidences. I'm not listing like, in the 80s and 90s, it was like every day you were dealing with something, whether somebody's grabbing you inappropriately, saying something inappropriate. But I said, no, I'm going to stick to these 3 incidences. So my therapist at the time, who was just completely amazing, she wrote like the best report of her life absolute best report of her life. And we submit it to Veterans Affairs. Believe it or not, instead of getting an increase in my mental health diagnosis, I ended up getting, this is no word of a lie, I got 1% for 3 sexual assaults. So it worked out to be like $60 a month initially, what I was supposed to get. And I was like, are you
So
kidding me?
enough for a very average gym membership, maybe.
Exactly. I couldn't even put gas in my car. So I spoke with the woman who was kind of like heading this class action. I said, what do I do? She said, you need to speak to the lawyer of the class action. So I phoned him up and I said, hey, what do I do? I just put this in. I only got 1%, and it was just something nobody had thought about because again, as we know, VAC adjudicators have very specific things in mind, when they're looking at it. So this MST stuff was very new to them, even though this was supposedly an MST designated VAC office. So he said to me, he says, you have to take it to the appeal board. And at first I was really hesitant to take it to the appeal board because I thought, I don't want to keep reliving this stuff. But I do have to say the appeal board was utterly amazing when I did this because I know that, again, there's a lot of horror stories over the appeal board. And I'm
They've been
sitting,
good to me.
they've been fantastic to me because I sat there and these two
Is that
women
the
looked
same
at,
as the Bureau of Pension Advocates?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
they've been good to me, but now
I've been very good.
with the cuts, they've been cut literally in half.
I've heard
So
that.
the Bureau of Pension Advocates was way overworked and overtasked in the first place,
Yeah,
understaffed. And even though they were wildly understaffed and could have used double the numbers,
yeah,
they've been cut in half. So they only have half the numbers. So they
exactly.
are, how does that work out? So 4 times, 75% too small?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So when I went to them, they were just utterly amazing. I'm sitting there and they're reading my file and they're like, "Why are you even here? Why are you here?" Because, they said we know exactly all of this went on in the military. We completely believe it. And they said it was one of the shortest adjudications they'd ever had. It was solved in 20 minutes. And I went I went from like I don't know this 1%, to like 25%, like within a matter of a few minutes. But
Yeah.
again, we're talking about like the layers of trauma that's added to it. So I had to go through that process again to relive that and then to sit there before the pension bureau and to say, no, like this legitimately did happen. And I know I'm not the only one that had this same experience of,
So this
back
brings us
denying them.
to the importance of Alberta Recoil.
Yes.
So whether it's Alberta Recoil or service officers at your local Legion or service officers at the Veterans Association Food Bank, the system is predatory. They count on you quitting. They count on you tapping
Yes.
out. They count on you being denied the first time and just quitting and saying, nope, I can't do this anymore. The system is predatory. Of anything that I've got done, it was only done on appeal. It was done the second time or the third time. And I've gone from zero, like a hard no way in hell, zero to, oh yeah, no, 100%, yes, of course. So it's a pretty wild gap that's there, and that's what Alberta Recoil is there for. So
Mhm.
how do people get a hold of Alberta Recoil? And it's anybody in the country, right?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Anyone in the country. We even service veterans in the United States as well, or even US veterans that are here in Canada are more than welcome to join us. Yeah, I don't think we've had anybody from Europe yet, but I know when I was in Europe last year, I sat in on peer support. So all of our peer support is virtual, is what it is. You come as you are type of thing. You usually have to go through like an intake with John Senior beforehand. They can reach us through our Facebook page. We do have a web page as well. We have Instagram, but I'm sorry, I haven't really been up to date on that one as well. So you can get a hold of us at info@albertarecoil.com, or my email is heather@albertarecoil.com. John, Laryssa also does our family peer support, which you and I haven't even talked about yet as well too.
We'll
And
do that next time.
Yeah, so we've got so much different peer support that we do offer. And again, it's a really safe space and it's like no cost. You come wherever you're at. You're angry, you're pissed off, whatever it may be. You know what? This is the space for you. And there's no trauma dumping. Because again, that's what everybody, always worries about is the trauma dumping. So we do that. We also help people get their paperwork together for VAC. We don't like personally do it, but it's just nice to have like a second set of eyes on it, just to say, well, have you thought about adding this, about adding that? um, or we put them in contact with whatever they may need. Is it the food bank? Is it a quilt of valor? Do they want to just go do something fun at a horse equine program with either can praxis or wayfinders? So the way I like to kind of describe Alberta Recoil, it's like community outreach is what we've got. Like we've got like a super safe space. People love our office. It's very military centric, and people always say like how comfortable they feel in our office and how much they just enjoy just being there. And we've had some veterans just come, just hang out and just have coffee and just like I'm just going to kind of come here and sit in your office for the day. And we're like, okay, sure. So yeah, what else can I tell you about Alberta Recoil? I'm really proud of it. Again, if you would have asked me like, 6 years ago, if this is kind of what I envisioned, I would have told you no. I would have told you like, no, I'm not being a peer support facilitator, even though like I don't facilitate. Or would I be speaking in front of the Senate or the House of, committee? No, no.
Inch by
No.
inch, all of us
Yeah.
working together, we're all
Hmm.
making a difference, Heather, for sure.
Oh,
And you are personally, you are absolutely making a difference in the lives of others, and thank you for
well,
that.
thank you for thank you for saying that. I do appreciate it because, like so many times when you're in this work, you kind of wonder, am I doing the right thing? Am I making a big enough difference? And kind of not just banging your head against the wall. So,
Yeah. Well, it does make a difference. And if that difference is only for a few, that's fine. Just last night, I received a text from a friend who's a longtime listener. He's listened to every episode I've ever done, which is a whole lot of Mark. But he was wearing an Operation Tango Romeo T-shirt that was produced by We Got Your Six Apparel, veteran owned and operated. Another shout out for them. But he was wearing the T-shirt, and then a guy that I served with in Croatia walked over and goes, "Hey, I know that guy." And they had a chat. They took a picture together, and he texted that to me. It was somebody's thumb in the camera, which is hilarious. I didn't think people still did that,
Oh my
but
gosh.
very, very rewarding. So if all I've helped is a couple of people, that's fine. But luckily, it's more than a couple, and really, what more can you ask?
Absolutely.
And the total impact, you've helped hundreds, if not thousands, of people, and that's a big deal. And for anybody that's looking for some purpose, looking for something to do, there are organizations that need your help, whether it's the Veterans Association Food Bank. I could use some volunteer help. Uh, Alberta Recoil, there's a
Mm.
lot out there. There's a lot out there from coast to coast. And if you want to know where you can physically volunteer some time or some services, get a hold of me or Heather, and we'll point you in the right direction. But there is a big difference between happiness and purpose. Uh,
Yes.
do you find happiness through purpose? Not necessarily. I'm not an overly happy guy, but I've got purpose, and I don't feel joy too often. That's part of the injury. It's pretty rare,
Mm.
actually, that I feel joy. But I have purpose, and that gets me through. It gets me through the tough stuff, and it keeps me from suicide, honestly,
Mhm.
because I know that I've got work to do. If you have purpose, you have work to do. So when the intrusive suicidal thoughts pop in, you're like, yeah, fuck you,
Yep.
suicidal thought. I've
Yes.
got I've got people to help. I've got work to do. So you just fuck off. I'm not ready to leave the planet quite yet. Uh,
Exactly. And
that's
purpose
that's
is
the
so important.
that's the power of purpose. And if you want,
Hmm.
there's no greater purpose than like going golfing or motorcycle riding is good, but it's not purpose. It's not helping anybody. It's helping yourself, which is great. Like self care is important, I'm not poo-pooing self-care. It's critical. But if you really want a sense of purpose, help somebody else. And if you're not going to help somebody else directly, help people like Heather, help people like me. There's a bazillion of us out there. Help somebody, help others.
Yeah.
Thank you, my friend. I appreciate you being here. We were way overdue, and
I know.
we got a couple hours here now, and it's powerful.
No, thank you for having me. I know you've been bugging me for years, so yeah, it was great being here. So,
well, for the audience, if you're still there, if you're still listening, and you don't have any money and you don't have any time, you can still support us by comment, subscribing, sharing. It really helps. It helps a lot. Get these stories out, and you never know who the next benefactor is that's gonna hear this and decide to help Alberta Recoil, help others. Thank you for listening, everybody. Take care.